Well,
Yes.
welcome everyone. This is truly a delight to have such an august panel with us this evening. My name is Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III, and I serve as professor and department chair for public and nonprofit administration in the School of Management at the University of San Francisco. And I also have the distinct pleasure of serving as moderator for our panel this evening. Before I go on, I would like to bring forth the Dean of the School of Management, Dr. Charles Moses, who will bring greetings. Dr. Moses?
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here at this conference. Africa continues to be an interest of mine. Going back over 25 years, I lived in Africa, in South Africa, in the immediate years after the end of the apartheid regime. I was invited to come to South Africa by President Nelson Mandela, and I had an opportunity to work at one of the colleges there in a rural area in the far north of the country. And at that time, it was called Turfloop, University of the North. Now it's called University of Limpopo, 20,000 students. I'll never forget, we were asked by the province to do an audit of the number of students living in the university housing. And so we had to go back, and they had a university housing block, and there were about 40,000 people living in housing for 20,000. And you see, because the university housing was better than the housing in the rural areas around the university. So people had their families living there. It was quite an experience. It was also a politically charged experience. There was a lot of political fervor at the time. Students, young people, of course, they were hankering for change, pressing for change. Government was a little bit slow. And so just as in the case of many universities, the young people were kind of at the forefront of change in that country. So it was an exciting experience for me. In the intervening years, I've maintained very close ties with the African continent and an intense interest. I also note with great interest China's involvement in Africa, growing involvement in Africa. South Africa, I was also had the pleasure of being in South Sudan the day that they had their referendum to create a country. And I remember with a great deal of joy how I was in an area, I think it was the area where the Dinka clan lived, and they were all getting ready to go to the polls that morning, and they were very excited. And in Juba, South Sudan, there was only really two things: the Dinkas and oil. And so the Chinese were very big there. I never forget the most expensive hotel I ever stayed in my life was in Juba, South Sudan. It was a Quonset hut, and it had you could actually see between the slats of the Quonset hut. You could actually see outside. And that hotel cost $300 a night, and they didn't take American Express. It was run by China. It was called the Beijing Juba Hotel. And the only thing they had was the hotel, and they had a consulate. And they had China had tremendous oil exploration operation going on there. And so I'm very, very aware of the dynamics of China's relationship with the African continent. And also, as you know, the fraught relationship of late between the United States and China. China is coming on very, very, very solidly as a world power. And that causes some people in the United States a great deal of consternation. China is also an international, a truly globalist nation. They're all over the world. They have relationships all over the world, in many places where the United States does not have good relationships with people. And so that dynamic is of great interest to me both as a scholar and as someone who lived in Africa. So I want to welcome you. I'm very, very excited. Our CBSI, our China Business Studies Initiative, is one of our primary, in fact, it is probably our lead international initiative, not only for the School of Management, which I head, but also for USF in general. And they've been very, very active. Professor Yang, Shawa Yang, has been very much in the lead on that, and we're very, very active. We're going to continue to be more active as we go along. So it's going to be an exciting discussion, and I look forward to hearing some of the presentations. And thank you all very much, and I look forward to hearing more from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Moses, for your very inspiring words. And again, before we bring on Professor Yang, I do want to make sure that folks remember the title of our panel, which is examining China's investment in African nations, promises, and influence. And this panel is being hosted by CBSI and also Public and Nonprofit Administration Department. Professor Yang?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to CBSI's panel discussion. Africa, the second largest continent with 15% of the world population, could be the biggest story of the 21st century. With the Agenda 2063, Africa could become the next biggest powerhouse in the world. USF's China Business Studies Initiative, CBSI for short, is proud to present today's panel discussion. We have gathered a stellar group of the world's leading experts and scholars to discuss one of the most important triangular relationships, Africa, China, and the US. CBSI is a San Francisco Silicon Valley-based thought leader, knowledge hub, and relationship builder for the US business and its connections with China, Asia, and the rest of the world. We are the only research center at the University of San Francisco focusing on international business, leveraging over 500 years of Jesuit tradition of linking global education and commerce, and the Jesuits' historical connection to China. We regularly produce public events like this and host international conferences. We do cutting-edge research and disseminate it among policymakers and the business communities. Our hallmark International Student Ambassador Program has produced some outstanding business leaders. Today's event is the first in a series that features Africa and its role in the global economic and business landscape, especially post-COVID. In May 19th and 22nd this year, CBSI will co-host a symposium on Chinese outward foreign direct investment to Africa as part of the 21st AADB conference in Canada. In June 16th and 20th, CBSI will host a panel discussion on Chinese outward FDI to Africa, India, and Russia as part of IACMR conference at the invitation of Professor Ari Lewin. And again, in September 9th to 12th, CBSI will co-host Management and Organization Review Research Frontier Conference on China Outward FDI to Africa. The submission deadline will be May 5th, 2021. Professor Lewin and Professor Li both are here today and are the main organizers for this conference. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Richard Johnson III, a prominent scholar and author of many books. One of them is China's New 21st Century Realities, Social Equity in a Time of Change, for taking the initiative for organizing today's event. Thank you also go to today's co-sponsor, Public and Nonprofit Administration Department in our school. No event like this will be possible without a highly dedicated team behind the scene. I want to thank Regina Maniti, CBSI's admin assistant, Maple Zhu, CBSI's graduate student assistant, and Dr. John Bensavich, the director of Center for Teaching Technology, for their tireless effort putting together the event. And of course, I want to thank all the panelists for making time and sharing their expertise with our audience. And I want to thank you, the audience, and for coming today. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Young. That was quite remarkable. And thank you so much for your leadership of CBSI. You have just done a remarkable job over the years, and we are all beneficiaries of your work. So thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin with our panelists and presentations. First up will be Dr. Marco Tavante, who serves as professor and program director in the School of Management here at the University of San Francisco. Dr. Tavante.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Dr. Young and Dean Moses, and distinguished panelists and participants. It's my honor and privilege to be with you this evening or this afternoon or this morning or habari asubuhi from Kenya. It's really a pleasure to be with you because and allow me also to start this conversation, which I look forward to the second part, especially when we do in the Q&A. Um, I have a perspective, having worked several years or so in East Africa, in particular Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique, in development projects. Years ago, where certainly the prominence of Chinese company were not as the level as they are today. And yet I've been able and privileged to be in contact with other colleagues and friends that I maintain throughout the continent, both in universities as well as in non-governmental organizations and civil society who are working in this field. I've been able to go over with some other content that I have at the United Nations to extrapolate some of this research, which is obviously here. I don't have the time to go more in depth, but I'll give you an overview of these insights. I'd be, kind of trying to express an important message here, which is that the president of China Africa cooperation is certainly, it's a real departure from past Western Africa dependency dynamics, hopefully. But that's what I want to draw the line and the parallels with that, because certainly in my experience also having worked with several European NGOs, there has been an evolution in understanding the cooperation in Africa. And perhaps those lessons could be also retaken in consideration by China, as obviously also Europe started with more infrastructure development. Second, I would like to show also how Africa perspective and dependent in China Western powers engagement it's important to focus particularly on civil society. That's my second message that I want to show to you. It's obviously clear that China, in this perspective of South-South cooperation, has certainly bypassed many of the North-South type of past paradigms. And certainly China is reshaping international development. Many studies are showing this. It's also interesting to observe that there are almost a polarity that is developing that we hope to overcome. And the polarity is between a Western approach that is called official development assistance, which has been particularly strong since World War II and became very strong in the 60s and 70s, with a kind of a more emphasis on foreign direct investment that certainly China represents. And this duality also signifies a distinction between an approach for so-called political conditionality of this type of development on the side of those Western entities, including the EU, including the UN, I would say in general, even the UN includes many other approaches. In China, certainly that pushes forward this idea of political sovereignty. I've been privileged in my role as the president of the World Engagement Institute to be sitting in important high-level meeting with government officials. And certainly one of the principles that China wants to maintain is the not interference with the political decision-making process of those partnering countries. Another point to be made is that is part of the concern or the skepticism that existed in the international community regarding the China infrastructure solutions only in the cooperation approach is that do we repeat the same dynamics that we have seen in the early 60s in particular, 50s and 60s in the Western approach, which was similar to what is now China, very much infrastructure driven only. And even the Belt and Road initiatives had already exemplified some flaws within their approach, particularly within the exasperation of some of the debt dynamics, as it happened also in the case of Western corporations a few years ago. So it's important to observe that this notion of the rising tide lifts all boats, which I think in China has been known for quite a while, indicates that the economic development is important and essential, but we also need to pay attention to the quality of those boats, and the quality of the civil society in particular, and the ability of people and social level of capacity to be able to maintain as the economic rising of the tides comes up. This is also evident in some internal shifts that we see at the political level, with original observation from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Wang Yi, that development is just the master key for solving all problems, to more recently, about a month ago, when President Xi actually said that even though we strongly believe that it is about achieving lasting security through development, this is not a solution for everything. So finally, my observations is regarding the China-Africa cooperations is at three levels, or at least three levels of challenges, but also opportunities. One is that it's probably too early to say, but most probably China will be important for the over now 2 million people that Chinese that are in the African continent, to engage in a more intercultural integration, and that will be very important to observe in the near future. The challenge of climate and biodiversity is compelling, because we can no longer think about infrastructure development without a sustainability approach. We saw certainly the devastating effect that COVID-19 has given all over the world, and this is certainly something that continue and will continue to happen as we grow with the deforestation and other type of climate disruption. And finally, it's about the level of prosperity, focus on prosperity, not just people, planet, but also prosperity. And this is what I call it principal multilateralism, which is nothing new if you're familiar with the UN system, which is about basing on principles and compliance with those principles and accords. And that applies very well, particularly in the type of infrastructure development that China is doing in the African continent. So a possible solution is to find more connection between a Western world that has been for so long focusing on these principles behind the so-called civil and political rights, and especially China and other allies that have been focusing more on economic, social, and cultural rights. I think if we find more connections between these two, there will probably be possible to find a more prosperous and sustainable future for Africa. But I also would suggest, based on the experience and the suggestion of many nonprofit and NGOs and civil society organizations around the world, we see the importance of the responsibility of Africa to take this situation in their own hands, because only them, they can set parameters. For example, think about mineral conflicts, for example. We still don't have an international regulatory systems for this. And so only through the cooperation and the advancement of multiple stakeholders in the African level, that we can also arrive to a solution that, similar to what has been to the Kimberley process and beyond that, for the conflict diamonds. We need to work on that. So that's all I wanted to share with you in just this brief time I was given available, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tavante. That was very insightful, and certainly we look forward to comments and questions at the end of all of the presentations, because I'm certain that you've sparked something in someone or several people, and they would want to speak with you. So I think that's great. At this point, we're going to have Dr. Beatrice. And Beatrice, I am not going to try to pronounce your name. I apologize. So, but if you could pronounce it for us, I will just say Dr. Beatrice is from Nairobi, Kenya, where the local time there is like 3:30 a.m. in the morning. So we greatly thank her for being with us today. So Dr. Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard Gregory and Professor Xiaohua Yang for putting this together, and then also inviting me to be part of the panelists. Good morning, everybody. It's early morning, Nairobi, but I want to believe it is evening your side. So good evening, Wan Shanghao, everybody. And what a joy to be talking about China-Africa relations, which to me remains a great part of my interest, having spent about 5-6 years in Beijing and having lived in Africa and a great part of Africa, the greater part of my time. It's beautiful to really be sharing this from an African perspective, but also at a particular time when we Africans are looking into post-COVID recovery and what can actually bring sustainable development in this part of Africa. So just to really say, my name is Matiri Maisori. It's a pretty very, not very complicated. So I teach international business and trade at USIU, United States International University, and Riara University. But I also spent time looking at how to be able to strengthen institutions in the East African region, but also China, Africa, especially creating market linkages for SMEs that would wish to trade in China. And just really responding to the question of today, the question around legitimacy is there legitimacy around what China is doing in Africa? Broad, vast, 54 African countries. China is engaged in various projects and activities across the 54 African countries, not only one. And great diversity also in terms of the engagement that China has in Africa. Maybe most times we think it is only the infrastructures, but it is beyond the infrastructure. We have seen, China engaged in, health. We've also seen quite a lot of African students studying in China. And increasingly more important destination of foreign study than maybe US and European countries as well before. We have also seen China, engaged in, technology transfer, and I would actually really want to point out the area around communications, fintech, and we have seen quite a broad spectrum of what China is doing, manufacturing as well. In various African countries. So it is not just only the infrastructure area, but just really speaking to this question around legitimacy. In 2015, Africa put together what they believe and what the African countries believe is really the grand plan to be able to take them to a sustainable Africa by 2063, the Agenda 2063. And these are some of the key highlights that Agenda 2063 points out. And a greater part of it is really integration of the African continent, because as we come together to form the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which began trading in January, Africans believe that integration and connectedness of the African countries is going to be very, very key and vital in terms of not just trading with the outer world, but trading and engaging with each other as the African countries. I would say what we have experienced with China in the last 40 years of development presents, a great spectrum of opportunities and possibilities and what can be for the African countries. When we hear that China is able to achieve zero poverty, in the last, according to the last pronouncement, this is really positive and is a case that African countries would want to learn. How has it been and what is possible in terms of we achieving the same, but also in terms of technology development, infrastructural connectivity, and ensuring a healthier part of the world. And I just really want to propose and believe that with China having been that development partner, just saying China being one development partner, Africa, of course, has got various and many development partners, and we believe in multilateralism, a variety of them. But China presents that possibility of, recency in terms of the expertise, in terms of the understanding, in terms of the knowledge of what is possible to be done within a very short period of time. When we look at the infrastructural connectivity in China, I mean, this picture here shows, 2008 to 2018, that's about 10 years. And you can actually see the change in terms of the connectivity in China by rail, by roads, not only in the eastern part of China, but across board the greater part of China. So for an integrated Africa, for a connected Africa, this is what we believe, that there is actually a story to learn. There is a case in point to be able to learn from China. What are the possibilities and what can be done? And for Chinese companies that have participated in that kind of development within China, then this presents an opportunity and a great case, to replicate the same or to transfer the same kind of knowledge to the African countries. Also, in terms of urbanization, when we think about Africa having close to 2 billion people by 2050. That's huge. That's a big growth in the number, but also with the understanding that a greater part of these are going to live in urban areas. There is no better case, to learn from in terms of, I say again, in terms of the recency, in terms of the speed, in terms of how can it turn around in the fastest time possible than China, which has already been there as we are transitioning now. So also in terms of, grouping regions and organizing regions, we have seen China go ahead to, of course, not develop the eastern part of China, the inland China, but also really focus on particular areas which they believe are going to be important in terms of the future positioning of China, technology-wise, innovation-wise, and to also be very specific in terms of the industries that are located in those particular areas. And what Africans believe is that the diversity that is presented by the eastern part of Africa, western part, northern part, and southern part of Africa may be different. And how can we be able to tap into that knowledge that China has in terms of creating diverse kind of regions, but also cities and industrial regions to be able to develop the greater part of Africa. So with this, then we envision, large scale kind of, infrastructural projects, but also rapid transformation. And this is why, for me, I feel that China positions itself in a place of, they have been there in the recent past. They have done it. We have seen, those of us who have engaged with China, you have seen how quick it has been to transform China as a country with diverse regions and provinces, which present just the same scenario as we have in Africa, to be able to have very well progressed regional industrial cities and regions, but also to be able to ensure connectivity in terms of transport, information, energy, and water resources. So how beautiful would it be within a very short time, a quick turnaround, to have, Africa turn around in the same way as China? And we believe that there is no better time than now. There is no other time than now when, we are all looking into post-COVID recovery and ensuring sustainable living conditions for all across the world than now. So in this way, I believe that there is a strength in partnerships, not only for us with China, but for the rest of the world. And this really then poses a challenge or opportunity for all partners that really wish to engage with Africa. And I totally agree with the first presenter. Africa is taking the first step in terms of defining what way we want to go and what way we want to engage. And this really then tells you why we believe Agenda 2063, which is really commonly put together by all African countries, is where we want to go, is what we want to believe. And for that, presents opportunities for all developmental partners to be able to come in terms of creating affordable financing for the projects that we have, but also creating new business models into how we can be able to achieve more sustainability, but also partnerships beyond just the government and the inclusion of the private sectors, the civil societies, but beyond all, the use of more sustainable measures of the development. Environmental protection remains key to us. Use of renewable energy. Africa is blessed with so much sunshine, so much wind. So the model that actually allows us to be able to tap into more renewable energy, but also to be able to create more productivity and use of digital technology. This is really what we believe is the right or the legitimate partner or developmental partner for African countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Beatrice. That was absolutely wonderful. And I witnessed Dr. Chavante aggressively taking notes as you were speaking. So I'm confident that he will have a few comments for you during the Q&A section. And but that was very well done. We're going to go right away now to Dr. Peter Lee, who is at Nottingham University in China, and he serves as professor there. Dr. Peter.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for having me here. Okay, let me show my screen here. Okay, so basically, my talk will focus on basically one issue. It's at the corporate level. So I try to avoid politics. I try to talk about business only, and how the Chinese companies actually, one of the Chinese companies is doing in Africa, and this is a very unique model. Because this company does something very different, challenging all the international business theories and prescriptions and argument. And so this is a really interesting thing. So this company is founded in 2006. And the founder was a senior manager of a previous Chinese mobile phone makers in China. And but this company's sole purpose is really doing business in Africa, not in China. So a Chinese company registered in China, started in China, but not having business in China, but only business in Africa. And it's had this whole unique set of inclusive innovations that at the bottom of the pyramid market. Okay, so that is really then there's the leading brand in the mobile phone sector. This company is Transcend is the leading brand. Okay, so we can take a look at some of the examples how what are the innovation they've been doing. And one is a multi-card standing by, so they will not just have one same card. There were multiple same cards, okay, slots in the design of the phone. and the high quality loud music technology because of the special need in Africa, and have waterproof and anti-corrosion design. Then the most interesting one that caught my eye when I studied the case study of this company is really the dark skin photography technology. So that really designed a unique technology, try to basically help the consumers in Africa to make sure that their dark skin will still be nicely reflected in the photography, especially use the artificial intelligence technology. Okay, and also as a long-standing standby function because of a lack of charging facilities, so on, and the high-power flash point. Okay, that's also unique for the local markets in Africa, and of course in African language library. So there's a whole set of the things only for the local markets in Africa. So they designed a thing for African consumers, and because they identified the spatial need. So I will go through some of the success factors for us to take a look. They were comprehensive and a thorough analysis of the unmet demands in African market, and also that there was a neglect by the international rivals. And they do not want to design a cell phone only for African markets, but this Chinese company did everything just the opposite. They designed a phone fully and solely for the African markets. It is not adapted from the Chinese market, not adapted for other places. But then they have a very in-depth interactions with the local consumer potential users to have do a very thorough market research to find out that they had abundant information and how they can design a proper product really suitable for the local markets. And then they also take advantage of what they have at home. They had the supply chain management, and they have kind of parts, components manufacturing in China, and they learn quickly, and they transfer the market sensitive activities from the previous bottom of the pyramid market, China, particularly China experienced some time ago, okay, 20 years ago. Then they use some of the experiences, transfer that to Africa, but the product design itself is fully for African markets. And they done a large number of user-involved tests, collecting the feedbacks and information for improvement, enhancement, and they have established very strong, trusting relationship with local consumers. Then they have take advantage of the cross-regional advantages. Components are produced, developed, capacities actually already in China, Shenzhen, then assembled actually locally. So that would be the kind of combination. So this is the operation itself is kind of multinational cross regions. And they have inclusive cooperation with local divergent partners, particularly for the product iteration, enhancement, and the cost advantages. And they have a reasonable market segmentation and business model innovation to enhance the user stickiness. Okay, then and also after sales services, and also the features they've been added along the way to make the products more suitable for the local markets. Then the proper introduction of the new products following the trend with higher quality and higher price performance, and evolved with the local demand change. And so those are the important things for the improvement. I just want to share a very simple story, simple case to illustrate the possibility of having a very novel model that develop a product solely for the local markets, not adapted from other places, but at the same time take advantage of the international division of labor with the global supply chain, and for the local market. So that's the model itself is really it's the first time I heard about any company doing this. And so it's a very interesting case study to not only to talk about the bottom of the pyramid, inclusive innovation, but also about international business. For example, internationalization process normally start from home, going abroad, but they didn't start that way. They start in Africa then end up in Africa, but at the same time take advantage of the experience they had in their previous country. But so this is also very much compatible with another theory I call them second home model. So you have first home, you have a second home. You take advantage, leverage the two homes that you offer probably the better product that any one single home can offer. So that's really the takeaway from this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peters. That was really quite interesting, and I was not familiar with the information you presented. So this is something that's adding to my knowledge base this evening. Dr. Malali is a researcher and a university instructor there in the great country of Finland. So, Dr. Malali.
Thanks, Richard. So firstly, I want to say thank you to the organizers for putting together this event and for the invitation. And I'm excited to be here with my other panelists, and I'm looking forward to an insightful discussion. So for the past few decades, China has made significant inroads into the African economy in the areas of trade, investment, and development assistance. Its engagement with Africa has attracted much attention and scrutiny from the media, academia, policymakers, politicians who question the real motives of China in Africa and are concerned about its impact on Africa's development trajectory, and also on the wider impact on global balance of power. The engagement is particularly significant due to the growing power and influence of China in the world. Moreover, China's growing influence on the African continent has come to be viewed as a threat to the influence of Western powers on the continent, albeit relatively. Through its economic activities on the continent, China seeks to promote its strategic economic and political interests. It expects to gain access to natural resources to fuel its industrialization, access to new markets for its exports, and to new frontiers for its multinational companies to expand into. Similarly, African governments expect that the engagement will yield economic benefits that will spur industrialization, infrastructural development, catalyze growth in several economic sectors, and lead to job creation, skills development, and technology transfer. And with over 12 or about 12 million youth joining Africa's labor force each year, there is indeed a need for African countries to industrialize and to create jobs for their youth. Therefore, it makes economic sense for African governments to consider China as a viable development partner and the engagement as one that could potentially contribute to economic modernization in Africa. African states have benefited from the embrace of China, for example, in the areas of infrastructural development, particularly in terms of financing, where the continent is currently experiencing a financing gap of about 68 to 100 billion US dollars, and China is helping to close that gap. ICA, the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa, puts China as the single largest financier of infrastructures on the continent, committing up to 25 billion US dollars in 2018 alone, with sectors such as transport, ICT, telecoms, power, benefiting significantly from Chinese financing in infrastructure. Chinese investments in labor-intensive manufacturing industries also, such as apparel, footwear, construction, has driven high demand for semi-skilled and unskilled labor, contributing to employment creation, skills transfer, and enabling initiatives such as the Made in Africa initiative. The engagement is economically pragmatic, and it offers African countries an alternative in their choice of development partners. And without question, China's interest in deepening engagement in Africa has in recent years also catalyzed a new level of interest from other countries, such as the US, Germany, France, Great Britain, to name a few, as well as Western IFIs such as the IMF and the World Bank, all seeking to deepen economic engagement and partnership with the continent. And of course, to retain and counter Beijing's influence, or retain their own influence on the continent and counter Beijing's influence on the continent as well. Programs such as the US's Prosper Africa program, the UK's UK Africa Investment Summit, the EU's Africa-Europe Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Jobs. All these programs mirror Beijing's embrace of trade and investment for development versus the traditional aid in Africa. Though the question of whether these initiatives are able to successfully counter Beijing's activities in the region remain open, what is sure is that it creates an opportunity for African countries to leverage the interest and competition between China and the rest of the world to achieve their development objectives. I will stress, just as Dr. Beatrice said earlier, that African countries and African leaders want to be able to engage with whatever partner they can best partner with to achieve their development objectives, be it a Western partner or China. China is also benefiting from the engagement, as while Africa needs China for the economic opportunities that the engagement brings. Africa is also quite important to China, no less because Africa lends China legitimacy on a global stage. And this is particularly important given the increasing unfavorable views of China in the West and in Asia. Furthermore, just as African countries benefit from Chinese financing of its infrastructure development, Chinese firms have also benefited greatly from this. Africa makes up to 30% of their construction market globally, and the value of Chinese construction contracts in Africa has surpassed $40 billion every year since 2011. Chinese companies have also gained new markets for their experience in international markets as well. Despite the disruptions from COVID-19, we will continue to see China strengthen its ties with African countries, economically, diplomatically, as well as culturally. China and Chinese companies continue to maintain relations and build goodwill to secure future commercial and strategic interests on the continent. The COVID-19 pandemic, as well as China's Belt and Road Initiative, further offer inroads into for China to expand into Africa. And while meeting the continent's needs for infrastructure, finance, medical supplies, including vaccines to combat the pandemic. To conclude, I would like to stress two things. Firstly, views on China-Africa often tend to oscillate between negative and positive extremes, but it's important to see China as occupying a more nuanced position, not simply as a malign actor in Africa, and not as a benevolent actor in Africa either. The engagement is also one of challenges and opportunities. Challenges such as the effects that Chinese competition from Chinese firms pose for local manufacturing firms in Africa, as well as the effects of Chinese loans on sustainable debt management and wider macroeconomic management in African countries, as we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting these issues. Also, there are environmental and socioeconomic impacts to be considered when it comes to the engagement. Secondly, I would stress also that China is both a partner to African countries and a competitor. And it's important for African governments to see China as such and the engagement as such, one of partnership as well as one of competition. And only when African countries begin to think of China in that way, as a competitor and as a partner, can they engage more strategically and leverage the engagement successfully for their own development objectives. So I look forward to questions and further discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was quite fabulous, and certainly something to think about, positioning Africa within the context of working with China in partnership and so forth. So I'm certain there will be a number of questions and comments for you afterwards. So so again, thank you for that very insightful presentation. We'll now go to Dr. Ari Y. Levine, who serves as Professor Emeritus at Duke University in North Carolina. Dr. Levine, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I should point out that compared to the rest of the panelists, I am actually very new to Africa. I have some slides here. I don't know if you can put them up for me. But I should point out that for the last 8 years, I've been the editor-in-chief of a journal called Management and Organization Review. This journal was founded by Professor Ann Tsui, who I actually hired in 1981 to come to Duke University as an assistant professor. I'm showing you the current issue of the journal, Year of the Ox. And one of the things that you see in that issue, and Xiaohua did me a favor and already emailed to everybody a free URL that you can download this issue because of the initiative of the journal on deglobalization and decoupling. Could you see the next slide? Yeah, good. So over a year ago, we decided to have, with the initiative of Helena Barnard, who is one of the deputy editors of the journal, together with Professor Peter Pingley, who was also a deputy editor, we decided to have a conference, what we call a Research Frontiers Conference and Paper Development Shop on China Outward Foreign Direct Investment in Africa. It was supposed to be held this year, but because of the COVID pandemic, it was supposed to be held last year, and because of the COVID pandemic, it was moved to this year, and then now we moved it all the way to September. We're still accepting papers for the non-invited papers, but it's this conference and the preparation for this conference and this work on deglobalization and decoupling, which is behind what I will be discussing today. Can I have my next slide? And there we go. Yeah. The conference on decoupling the whole idea of the whole point of what I'm trying to share with you is that deglobalization already is underway for some time and has received further prominence because this past year, the famous economist Paul Krugman had a mea culpa where he admitted that American economists made a fundamental mistake in underestimating how China's entry to the WTO in 2000 would impact industrial jobs in the United States. So as a result of this recognition, there has been a lot of discussion and action about how to separate ourselves from China, you might say. And the pandemic has simply accelerated this because the pandemic basically showed us how optimized global supply chain with huge concentration and foundation in China affect the national security of other countries, not just the United States. And so between the pandemic and the ongoing development around deglobalization, especially in relationship to China, was already underway by the time, and the pandemic only accelerated that. And basically, the dominant scenarios that we developed in the issues that I mentioned today that you can download, the dominant scenario is that China and the US are inexplicably moving towards a long-term economic Cold War. And if in fact this is true, then it has implications for Africa. And the point that I'm making about Africa here, that means that Africa is very likely to become a contested area of competition between the axis of China and the US and the axis around the US. Now that doesn't mean that it's bad. Actually, that's an opportunity for Africa, in my opinion. But if this is going to happen, or if this is happening, this is a point of conversation that I've not heard so far. That in fact, as Africa is becoming an area of competition, that it means that the Western countries have to change their view about how they come to Africa, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But China also has its own problems, and I'm mentioning a few of them here. It's a rapidly aging society. That means that it's really crucial for China to export low-level jobs. Where can they export it? They're not going to export it to India, which is a real competitor. We see them exporting these kind of jobs to Africa. The Bridge and Road Initiative that was initiated a few years ago, we should be honest about why it was initiated. It was initiated because there's no room anymore in China. There's no capacities. There's no need for these huge state-owned enterprises that build roads, bridges, railroads, ports, airports, housing dams, and so forth. Where are they going to build those? They have to find another country. The best country to go to, the best region in the world to go to is Africa, which has huge needs for infrastructure projects, for airports, and so forth. But as China comes to Africa, unlike the foreign direct investment by countries like the United Kingdom and France and the United States and Germany and the Netherlands and so on, most of the project financing is debt financing. It is not a foreign direct investment. It's not a joint venture. It's not a capital investment. And there is some potential negative consequences to these huge projects that are basically financed by China. In fact, China project financing is 10 times as large as its direct investments in manufacturing on job creation jobs. But I don't think that the West, I don't think that European countries and the United States really have the right playbook. My point is, and we can discuss it, but I think that the Western countries really need a new playbook beyond, IMF drawing rights, World Bank loans, foreign aid, and so forth. And I don't think that this has been really seriously considered in the West. Lastly, I've not heard yet about India. India already is a very important player in Africa, and they play in a way that is very supportive and builds up manufacturing and builds up jobs, much more so than what we see investments by China. I think I have a number here someplace about, I think China investments only create about 1.7 something jobs per, maybe it's on the next slide. But the point is, we've not mentioned India, and I think that India's involvement in Africa is under discussed, and this could be a much more productive model. We've already discussed about the rapid growth of the African population, but it's also a huge challenge. One of the surprising things about Africa is that the fertility rate continues to be very high in spite of the decline in mortality rate. Historically, when mortality rates have gone down, fertility rates have also gone down in other countries, in other societies. This is not the case in the United States. And there's, I don't know who mentioned it, whether it was Dr. Muturani or whoever, but if we have a population of 1.2 billion in 2015, the estimates to reach 2.5 billion in 2050 and 4.5 billion in 2100, if these estimates are close to reality, these are huge challenges for the African continent. So clearly, foreign direct investment is one of Africa's biggest needs. But the reality so far, in spite of the China investment, and by the way, the collective investments, FDI of the UK, France, Germany, and the United States and Netherlands, outstripped the total investments of China in Africa. And nobody mentioned that so far today. But nevertheless, inward FDI per capita, Africa is the lowest region in the world. In other words, the rest of the world has had better experience with FDI than Africa. As I say here, China is not the largest investor in FDI flows. China dominates in project financing, and we've already had many examples of transportation project, railways. I mean, the railway projects are incredible. I mean, I don't want to take time to list all these railway projects, but they're quite amazing. I think that there's a dependency due to project financing. And project financing, as I mentioned, is 10 times greater than its direct greenfield investments. China investments so far have not created the similar jobs per $1 million investments that it succeeded in other parts of the world. So if you compare China investments in Africa, it's 1.78 jobs per 1 million investment, compared to 2.24 jobs for 1 million investments in other regions where China is invested. For example, in Southeast Asia and the ex-Soviet republics of Kazakhstan and the other stands and so forth. And although I heard it between the lines, not all countries in Africa welcome Chinese OFDI. Take, for example, Ethiopia. Ethiopia did get some financing for its mega dam, but it's actually a very small proportion of the total investment. Ethiopia chose to finance the dam itself and find other sources. To me, that means that this is also a question should be discussed. Thank you very much.
At this point, we'll have Dr. Jeffrey Peller. Jeffrey's at the University of San Francisco, and he serves as professor of politics.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. So in these short remarks, I will discuss how China is impacting African cities. I'll make 4 points. First, China as a model and an enabler. The title of a recent International Growth Center report is, Can Africa Learn from the Chinese Urbanization Story? Stefan Durkon and his colleagues point to 4 factors that explain how urbanization helped China alleviate poverty. 1, clear systems for land ownership and proactive planning. 2, proactive investment in infrastructure and services. 3, empowering local governments to raise finances and to pursue large-scale targeted investments needed to improve livability. And 4, ensuring physical connectivity. Now, African urbanization has not coincided with large-scale job creation as it did in China, at least not yet. And this is because these institutional and structural factors do not exist in many African cities. But I would argue that these are not technical matters, but rather political challenges that have to be settled. For example, land ownership and planning remain ambiguous in many cities and have their roots in pre-colonial structures of power, as well as racialized systems of urban planning left behind by colonial authorities. Empowering local governments to raise finances is not only a matter of tax collection capacity, but power struggles between different social groups and government jurisdictions, as the cases of Nigeria and Ethiopia demonstrate. Chinese investment sometimes exacerbates these underlying political tensions. 2, the meaning of infrastructure. W. Jude Moore outlines the scale of Chinese investment in African infrastructure. Over the last 20 years, China has financed the construction of over 6,000 kilometers of roads in Africa. But he continues, investment in infrastructure has not kept pace with this growth. In cities like Harare and Maputo, more than 30% of land within 5 kilometers of the central business district remains unbuilt. In the average African city, roads occupy a lower share of urban land than comparable cities around the world. Now, while China is helping fill the infrastructure gap, local communities often experience it on the ground as neocolonialism and meet it with resentment and resistance. They are sometimes displaced and lose homes. But more often than not, this depends on political conditions and not the guidelines of China or Chinese companies. The 2 railways in Kenya and Ethiopia are a case in point, as Maria Del Caray recently argued. She finds that local rules shape the implementation of the railway project. In other words, Chinese contractors will adapt to the local conditions on the ground. My research suggests that while China provides capital and resources, it's the politics of belonging and local political connections that determine which communities are displaced and which remain in place. 3, reshaping urban space. China is investing in a massive expressway that goes through the middle of Nairobi. The Chinese contractor China Road and Bridge Corps is the contractor. The elevated expressway will not only cut down on traffic, it has the potential to create 2 Nairobis, or at least deepen the existing inequalities in the city. The worry is that the elevated toll road will be for the growing elite to drive their cars, while the poor and minibuses operate underneath. Importantly, the roads do not account for bicyclists and pedestrians, many of whom are working class laborers making their livelihoods in the city. Chinese investment is also contributing to a construction boom of gated communities and luxury housing. The most infamous case of this is Calamba, that was built with Chinese support in Angola, which resembles the ghost towns outside of some of China's largest cities. While scholars have debunked the myth that these are truly ghost towns, they still represent a new form of architecture and use of public space based on private security and dense high-rises. Many of these communities are gated and serve as satellite cities that are disconnected from city centers except by car. Some worry that Chinese-built satellite cities are a new urbanization paradigm. 4, the democratic benefits of slums. My final point will be a short one. The model of urbanization that China espouses rests on a modernist logic backed by an authoritarian government. Part of this model rests on ridding urban areas of slums, as China has done through 70 years of slum removal policies. This misses the value of slums, places where opposition politics form and creative forms of social movements and collective action emerge. This can offer migrant and poor populations a right to the city that they would otherwise not have. Chinese investments in African cities have the potential to transform African cities, but should not come at the expense of bulldozing the homes of existing populations and displacing residents from the city. Thank you, and I'll go ahead and share some of these comments in the chat feature.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was succinct and very insightful. Appreciate you being on the panel and providing us with such things to think about. And so finally this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, we have with us Dr. Jean-Claude Maswana, and he is a professor of economics in Seoul, Korea. In Japan.
So I will quickly try to address a couple of ideas extracted from the announcement of this webinar. The first one would be looking into China's interest in Africa in the 21st century's ever-changing global economy. And then I will be trying to see whether the US have a role to play in this bilateral interaction. The second, I will be trying to look into China's political motivation in Africa development in terms of some of the concern that this interaction, this engagement is raising at international development community, as well as among some Africans such as myself. To deal with the first issues, I will be summarizing my ideas in terms of China's active role in African development and Africa's passive attitude. One of the key, when you look at what have changed from 1996 to 2006 into recent years, just visually, if you look at the top African, the important trading partner of China, in 1996, we have only one country for which China used to be the main source of import. And in recent years, more than half of African countries have China as the top trading partners. But the key issue is that the trade between most African countries and China has been unequal, in the sense that the trade balance have been, from a accounting point of view, a deficit for many African countries. Although the trade deficit might not really reflect the full effect of the bilateral trade. But from a accounting perspective, the trade deficit is obvious for the vast majority of African countries. And then African countries have recently launched the African Continental Free Trade Area. And this has been connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. And then the key here is that to succeed, African countries will definitely need Chinese investment as well as investment into infrastructure development, because to yield the expected trade and manufacturing development objectives, African countries need a huge investment flows. And right now, only China has the capacity as well as the will to provide for such investment needs by African countries. And then there have been also the soft diplomacy, mostly investment in African youth. And this can be indirectly been assessed when you compare, for example, the destination for African, the student overseas out of the continent, which used to be dominated by countries such as the UK, France, or United States. But in recent years, China is the main destination for African students. And then all of this, if I have to really summarize this quickly, when we look at what China has been doing in Africa, we can see clearly that China first have a clear development agenda for itself. And China does have a clear development agenda when it comes to its engagement with Africa around the forum known as the FOCAC. As we know, every time that we have a FOCAC event, China will be announcing new cooperation initiative and then making new pledge for development packages, while African leaders mainly acknowledge and take notice of those announcements. No single country, to the best of my knowledge, have a clear agenda when it comes to its own engagement with China, and nor the African Union has a clear agenda when it comes to its engagement with China. So Africa has been mostly in passive role, which is the same kind of attitude and role Africa has maintained for years, for decades with Europe or United States. So Africa needs to be more active and should define its China agenda. And United States has a key role to play. United States can join a trilateral dialogues on African development, because when you look at the global value chain in which Africa is connected, much of the trade between United States and Africa, which used to be based around mineral resources, has been completely redirected to China because of the relocation by US multinational companies to China. Much of the previously imported raw material from Africa has been just redirected through China, because the assembly line of the world manufacturing processes is located in China. So this economic interaction, this global value chain and supply chains, should also reflect the sort of engagement in which United States, China, and Africa can get involved. So a trilateral dialogue is possible. Let me quickly move to the last issue, China political motivation in African development. This is clearly raising a concern for a very simple reason. When you look at to compare the UK and France, the traditional partners of African development, because of the colonial, historical and colonial link, just looking at the visual that I'm sharing with you on the screen, when you look at the French presence, that is the left map, and the Chinese presence, visually you can see that now Chinese firms are equally present compared to the French. The picture, I just dropped the pictures like 30 years ago, you will see that China was almost nowhere to be found, but 3 years ago, we can see that French companies and Chinese companies are competing on equal foots. And then what does it mean? For many Africans, there is a mixed views of this. It means that going forward, there will be more Chinese firms than even the local indigenous African firms operating in manufacturing and other sectors. So this is supporting the view, it's raising concern when it comes to the so-called neo-colonial attitude or presence of China. The second issue, which is also connected to France, is the growing military presence by China, either through the military base like in Djibouti or through the UN peacekeeping operation. And China is growing military presence in Africa, and not to mention the growing export of weapons from China to different African countries, as well as investment into military equipment and training of different national armies. So we can discuss the detail later. I would prefer stopping here. Thank you.
And I greatly appreciate the speed at which you gave your presentation. There was a lot there to unpack. So thank you very much, Jean-Claude. That was Jean-Claude, that was a great presentation. We're gonna open up now, and I know we really are running out of time, but I would like to still take a few questions from the audience.
Just to respond briefly, I think there has been some interesting questions raised in the chat or in the Q&A, and I think it's really important for us to think how certain lessons that the West historically has learned can certainly be reapplied for today's challenges of China, as we heard also from Dr. Jeffrey and others panelists. At the same time, China is really innovative in its approach of infrastructure development, but also giving the primacy to people and to kind of industry, as we heard also from Dr. Peter, etc. I think the future has to be about dialogue, because there has to be some interconnected lessons between what the past colonial, neo-colonial, new globalization, or new codependency, because effectively we have not talked in this panel yet many of the issues that have come out in the Q&A by the audience. That has to do with also resource development, resource dependency, not just development, dependency, and other issues that have to do with putting aside the social outside of the economic and the sustainable element. So that's what I wanted to respond to this in the brief time, but I want to thank everyone for this conversation. I look forward to future possibility. Thank you all.
Great, thank you, Dr. Chavante. Are there other questions or comments for the audience?
Thank you so much for having this very robust discussion about China's role on the continent of Africa. In fact, Dr. Jeffrey Paula, as well as the recent presentation by Dr. Maswana, are really addressing some of my concerns. I am heartened, as I said, by China's interest in the continent, but my concern remains, is China simply replacing the West in its exploitation of the continent? So back to Dr. Maswana's his presentation, that it appears that the African countries are allowing China to dictate what the agenda is, when it really should be the other way around. And that's my concern.
I think there is a two aspect around that concern. The first one is to make it clear that China is playing by the rule. The international trade and investment system was set up, or the current system was set up in 1995 with the establishment of the WTO. At that time, China was not a member. And then after joining in 2001, China has been taking advantage of the rule, especially when it comes to its engagement with Africa. So legally, in terms of legitimacy, China is really playing by the rule. We cannot really blame China for playing by the international rule in which he didn't really create. So second, the problem with Africa, I think it's Africa itself, as others have pointed out. African leaders has been very passive and more receptive in that interaction. Even though you look at what is happening when you study the details of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, you will clearly find out that condition leading to any potential success of the free trade agreement depends so much on China, even though China is not named in technical documents. But when you look at, you analyze the reality of it, only China has the capacity to really play a role and address some of the obstacles, the bottlenecks that need to be solved to expect a positive result of the free trade agreement. So in a sense, what is happening is the same thing that you see in African Union symbol. The headquarters of African Union itself was a donation from China. And then much of the development agenda designed so far, when you look at in details, you will find out that only China is the real actors able to implement the agenda that African countries are set up.
Hi, hello. My name is William. Thank you guys for the panel today. My question is, I have a few questions, but I'll ask, how is China's foreign policy toward Africa and having this sort of aggressive investment policy going to be affected potentially when they might have to deal with hostile governments that take over the government later? When they have an official policy of respecting the right of sovereignty and staying out of other countries' affairs, how difficult will it be to maintain that sort of rhetoric if their own commercial interests are threatened by political regimes that might be hostile to their policies in Africa?
There is quite a lot of diversity in terms of the way African countries engage with China. I think because they all have the FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which every 3 years will meet either in Beijing or China. It is commonly pursued or believed that each of the African countries engages the same way with China. But I just want to really say and point out there is quite a lot of diversity in the bilateral relationships between each of the individual countries and the way they engage in China. I think it is Dr. Alia who noted that some of the countries have actually gone ahead to be able to decline, the funding from China and be able to look alternative ways that they can be able to fund their infrastructural development. A case in example would be maybe Tanzania, Ethiopia, Senegal, and this has been commendable in terms of African countries choosing the journey and the direction that they want to really take. But just really to also respond to this question on the floor, in terms of hostile takeovers from other governments, I think one thing that has really been very key about infrastructural development by Chinese investors in Africa is the speed of execution. Most of them are actually done within the period of time when you have the current government going on. Not to say that some of them have really been transparent in the way it has been done, but what is really coming out very clear is that each of the individual African countries has to, even if we are relating on a multilateral level, be able to learn very quickly and be able to manage the kind of financing and the way they relate with African countries. The point that is very clear is that there is quite a lot of infrastructural gaps in African countries. There is financing gaps in African countries. China is willing, China is available. It might not be the best example in terms of the way the development can be done and the kind of FDI that is the best. And I want to really also say that, yes, it is true that for many African countries, The largest FDI financiers may not be China, may be other multilateral partners. And what there is here in point is that there is opportunity for all the interested parties to learn from each other. Each of them presents a good model, not to say one is better than the other, but for me, I just really want to say it is opportunity for all of them to be able to listen out to each other. But at the end of the day, the responsibility and the buck stops with the African countries. What is the best choice for themselves? Thank you.
I do want to give the last word of this session to Dr. Young, who will lead us out this evening. So thank you, Dr.
Well, I've been overwhelmed by the amount of expertise, information, and all the discussion that's been going on between among the panelists and the audience. I have to take time to digest a lot of what I have learned here. It's tremendous amount. I was thinking about, there's so much, so much discussion, and maybe we should think about the next, follow-up event or some kind of publication, something to follow up. But I really want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Richard Johnson III and all the wonderful panelists for taking the time to share with the audience your expertise and your insights and some of the great stories you share with us. And of course, I want to thank all the audience who's been speaking with us and being such a passionate group. I have so many questions. I don't think we have time for it. I wish we had more time to answer all your questions. And I hope that this is just actually beginning of such a discussion. This trilateral relationship among Africa, China, and the US is probably going to be dominant one, it's probably more important than any other relationship that we can see. It's not necessarily all the military, all the financial, but there are so many, other parts, social, economic, and some of the environmental, sustainable, business, that probably will define, probably the 2/3 of this century. And people tend to ignore this, but I mean, maybe overlook. I think this is a relationship, and African continent is something we cannot overlook. We really have to have a ongoing and the robust dialogue on it. So the world changes from here, and thank you so much for taking on this big project and have such a wonderful conversation with us. And I want to thank everyone, my team, for working so hard to make this possible. So please give them a big hand. I know we can't hear you, but I just really want to thank everyone here. Thank you.
If I may, on behalf of Dr. Peter Lee and myself, anybody who's interested, the Forum on Deglobalization and Decoupling and Management and Organization Review is still open. We're welcoming your commentaries to expand the debate. We will continue to publish them for the rest of the year. So please, if you were stimulated and you want to bring in the subject into the journal and see it, commentaries have to be short and provocative, which is exactly what I heard today from many people. So hopefully we'll get some of those. Yes.
We're very excited about that.
To our panelists, it's early morning. You can go to bed now. But again, we thank you so much for staying up, and to each of you for being engaged. And I echo in the words of my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Young, this was more than we could have imagined. And to our audience, thank you so very much. This was fabulous.
Pretoria.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Good night.